Hello, I'm doing a review for this book, The Phoney Victory by Peter Hitchens. In this book, Hitchens discusses the failures of the British government during the Second World War, why they were unprepared for war, why they were unable to be a leading power during the war, and how the success of the Allies in the war was not really down to Britain. This book delves into the politics of the time, particularly in Britain, and how this explains our involvement in the war, our mistakes, and ultimately the cover-up of our failures. Hitchens explains that the Second World War is placed on a pedestal and given religious reverence as something that we can be proud of as a nation, and that it was some kind of last great success and display of dominance by Britain. This war, we believe, was so good that men constantly seek to fight it again so that they can bathe in its virtue. According to Hitchens, this glory is not based in fact. Hitchens says that it's important we understand our weaknesses and our country's mistakes during World War II, primarily because that war is so rose-tinted and it is used as a justification for the national agenda up until this day, in terms of military action or tactical decisions that are made by the government. Perhaps the post-war years of privation, debt and rationing, when Britain had all the outward appearance of a defeated nation, persuaded us to assert ever afterwards that we stood alone and saved the world. These beliefs allowed us to think that the pains and humiliations that followed the costly victory of 1945 were therefore justified. The self-flattering fantasy that we won the war and the nonsensical but common belief that we did so more or less alone still leads to foolish economic and diplomatic policies based on a huge overestimate of our real significance as a country. I realised when I was reading this book how little I know about the details of World War II. I know when it happened, I know the names of a few planes, I know about rationing and the Blitz and women working. I know a lot about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, but I don't know many or any details about the fighting that the British Armed Forces took part in. It seems that we elbowed our way into this European dispute to prove our status as a great world power, although in reality we were still reeling from the First World War and were near bankruptcy already. The agreement with Poland was arranged in such a way as to ensure our entry into the war. In other words, if we did not more or less bribe or force Poland to be our ally, we might run out of allies so that we had no actual cause for which to go to war. As much as the British government wanted to demonstrate its global power, it seems that in reality it was unprepared for a major war. Our economic position simply did not allow us to create forces large enough to let us control the course of a European war. However, there was a feeling that something must be done, even though we were not directly threatened by Germany, and we were in no position to win a long war. We wanted to appear as the important global power that we still wished to be, but the bluff failed. As a country, we were impotent in our achievements, unable to take a decisive lead in proceedings, and left performing actions which were often unsuccessful or which were brutally beneath us, because that was all we could do. All the time, top officials were desperately trying to get the cooperation of the USSR and the USA. These great powers did finally win the war against Hitler, who was undoubtedly tyrannical, but it left the tyrannical USSR greatly empowered, it left the USA massively empowered, and the UK was left stripped of its assets, in debt, and in many ways a defeated nation, in no small part because of the hard bargaining of the USA. Becoming embroiled in the Second World War left Britain vulnerable. Because Britain could not afford this war and was not armed for it, the government was left begging for help from the USA. Hitchens gives details of the US's stripping away of UK assets. Again, I kind of knew that we went into the war with an empire and that we came out of it and had to give everything away. And I kind of knew that America made us do that in return for their help in the war. But the details of it are pretty shocking and show the US government as vultures killing off a wounded empire, taking revenge on an old adversary. Although, let's be honest, most of the British Empire wasn't gained through acts of benevolence. However, it certainly points out the deluded myth of the special relationship for what it is. Hitchens wants to make it very clear and stresses and states repeatedly that he has no sympathy with the Nazi regime and that he does not defend it at all. However, the awfulness of the Nazis does not excuse British government's bad decision-making, preceding, during and after World War II. Hitchens also clearly states that he does not hold the people who served in the British forces responsible for the less than honourable actions undertaken. He places all responsibility with the officials who ordered these actions. Nowadays, we look back at the tyranny of Hitler and feel that what he represents justifies whatever the Allies did in the Second World War. But most of what Hitler was doing was unknown at the time of war, so it cannot be used to justify the inhumane military decisions made by Britain or the danger that members of the British military were put in. For example, Air Force pilots had a 44% death rate. No doubt the Allied victory in Europe ended the murder. We can all be glad of that. But this does not mean that victory was sought or gained for that purpose, or that a revulsion against homicidal despotism was a main reason for the war. How could it have been? Our most valuable co-belligerent in Europe, the Soviet Union, was controlled by such a homicidal despot throughout our alliance. And let's not forget Russia, the USSR under Stalin. According to Hitchens, the USSR won the Second World War with American help. I guess this is why half of Europe was given to the USSR after the Second World War. That is something which I have never understood. Hitchens raises many home truths about when Britain behaved below the British standard, which we were supposed to be defending, such as the Allied bombing campaign on Germany or the consequences of the Potsdam Agreement. This book has given me more questions than answers about the Second World War, and through that, the First World War. And these are areas I will be looking to learn more about in the future. I was grateful there was a bibliography at the back of this book so that I could find out more about some of the books referenced. The Phoney Victory was a clear and easy to read book which someone like me, who knows surprisingly little about the British campaign of World War II, could keep up with the information and understand it in context. Although because it was very focused on the negatives, it could make Hitchens come across as whiny at times. Despite being well referenced, Hitchens can come across as lecturing as he focuses so heavily on the things the British government got wrong. This book was really interesting though to understand more about the politics, background and cover-ups of the Second World War. Reading this book, it's clear that British politicians were just as useless 90 years ago as they are nowadays. Okay, here it is again. Thank you.